People are often kind of wrong about the 3 levels of autism in numerous ways. You might have heard people refer to themselves as level 1 or level 2 or level 3 autistic. Sometimes when you're diagnosed, particularly if they use the DSM-5, you will be given one of 3 support levels. I wasn't given one. People often aren't given one over in the UK. My Patreon editor was actually asked to choose their own level, which sounds super stressful. Diagnose yourself, please. So let's have a look at how they decide who falls into each category, just in case you're asked to decide your own level at some point. Or in case, like me, you weren't given one, you can see where maybe you might fall. Of course, I can't diagnose you with anything. I'm not a medical professional. I am just somebody who says words on the internet. Before we start, autism is obviously such a broad spectrum, and I think trying to cram it into these 3 little narrow categories, it's never going to be an exact science. It can feel very imprecise and murky. There's crossover. I imagine this is just going to continue to evolve, and I tend to see it as we're just doing the best that we can with the information we have right now. Although maybe you could argue that we could also be doing better right now. And just quickly, there are 3 really important things to note about support levels that many people seem to get wrong or misunderstand. The first one I actually learned very recently myself. You're actually supposed to be given 2 support levels, maybe. The DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for autism is split into 2 chunks. So you have the social stuff, you have to hit all of that in order to be diagnosed. And then you also have restricted repetitive behaviors, or RRBs. So stimming and flexibility, intense interests, and the sensory stuff. And you only need to hit 2 out of 4 here in order to be diagnosed. But you're actually supposed to be given a separate level of support needs for each of the 2 major categories, so social communication and RRBs. In the DSM-5, it says, severity of social communication difficulties and restricted repetitive behaviors should be separately rated. So you could be level 1 for social communication, but level 2 for RRBs. So when you see people say they're level 2 support needs, I guess they're saying that they're level 2 in both domains. So maybe just keep that in mind as we go along. You might not be the same level for both. And so often this is just not mentioned. For example, on this page on the Autism Speaks website. Are we surprised? Probably not. Number 2, this is something people say quite often, but the DSM-5 does actually note that these levels may vary by context and may fluctuate over time. And sometimes your support levels might even fall below level 1, but that doesn't mean that you're not autistic. So these levels are certainly not fixed, and if a child is diagnosed with a particular level, it's not necessarily going to be their destiny. The DSM-5 says of the support levels, they may be used to describe succinctly the current symptomology, in brackets, which may fall below level 1, with the recognition that severity may vary by context and fluctuate over time. And number 3, support levels are not actually supposed to dictate what services an autistic person is able to access. The DSM-5 notes that support levels should not be used to determine eligibility for and provision of services. Indeed, individuals with relatively better skills overall may experience different or even greater psychosocial challenges. Thus, service needs can only be developed at an individual level and through discussion of personal priorities and targets. This all sounds great in theory, but in practice, support levels are often used to assign services. In Australia, level 2 and level 3 means you're automatically eligible for funding, but level 1 autistic people are not. They might still have access to it, but it's not automatic, which is kind of not how it's supposed to be. But remember, those pesky level 1s are hijacking autism and stealing all the support, squirreling away all the supports. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll leave my last video linked below and on screen. You might have noticed that in the DSM-5, the support levels are actually called severity specifiers. A lot of autistic people don't like this language. There's this sort of implication that we're talking about how bad, how serious your autism is. Are you mild, moderate, or severe? And I do see autistic people themselves using levels in this way. Sia kind of did it when she was on Zane Lowe's podcast and she was talking about being diagnosed level 2.
Level 2 autistic, which is there's 3 levels.
Wow.
And 1 is Asperger's, 2 is pretty autistic, and 3 is like non-verbal.
And I think this sort of thinking can lead to ignoring the strengths of higher support needs autistic people and minimizing the struggles of lower support needs autistic people, and just erasure of level 2, I suppose. Unfortunately, they always seem to be forgotten. We still, in 2025, can't get away from talking about autism like there are just these 2 extremes. So just a reminder, we're rating how much support an autistic person needs right now at this current stage of their life, not how much autism is in them. What percentage of autism are you? It's not like that. Okay, I think we've made enough clarifications. Let's go. Let's start with level 1, or requires support, because yes, even level 1 autistic people do require support. If you are rated level 1 in the social communication category, this might mean, number 1, without supports in place, your deficits in social communication cause noticeable impairments. So without maybe therapy, accommodation, support from another person, your difficulties with communicating and interacting will affect your daily life. Maybe you really struggle with job interviews, maybe you often come off as rude and end up in misunderstandings. Maybe you suck at group projects. That's me. I always asked to do them on my own, and it was a bad day if I wasn't allowed to. Note the word noticeable in the DSM-5 here. But we know masking is a thing. We know autistic people often put a lot of effort into making their impairments less noticeable, as the DSM would say, which makes it kind of tricky when autism is diagnosed based on your behavior, if you're doing everything in your power to cover up those behaviors. And obviously this is why so many people go undiagnosed. However, masking is acknowledged within the DSM-5 in numerous places, so diagnosticians should really be aware of this. They aren't always though. You know, an autism diagnosis in itself is not an exact science. Number 2, difficulty initiating social interactions and clear examples of atypical or unsuccessful responses to social overtures of others. So you might be level 1 in the social domain if you struggle to start conversations, struggle to know where to join in. If another person tries to talk to you, maybe engage in small talk, your answers might be a bit awkward or unexpected. Maybe your interactions often break down and end quite quickly, and you're not sure why this has happened to me a lot. Number 3, may appear to have decreased interest in social interactions. So you might seem like you don't want to make friends, whether or not that's true. Maybe it's true sometimes and maybe not true other times, but people always assume that you don't want to interact with them and you don't want to make friends, even when you do. I think we often just don't know how. We don't know how to initiate things. As a child, it took me a very long time to understand that I had to actually approach people and engage with them if I wanted to build up a friendship. I felt like it should just happen magically. They should be able to read my mind and then know whether they want to be friends with me or not, and then they should approach me. It just looked like it was happening magically for everyone else, I suppose. So I guess I just sat there with a blank expression, probably giving off a vibe that I didn't want to talk to them, that I didn't want to be friends, and then wondering why nobody wanted to make friends with me. The DSM-5 actually gives an example of somebody who would be classed as level 1 support needs for the social stuff. A person who is able to speak in full sentences and engages in communication, but whose to and fro conversation with others fails and whose attempts to make friends are odd and typically unsuccessful. So your back and forth conversation is sometimes off. Maybe you talk too much, maybe you don't talk enough, you just don't know what to say, and making friends is not always easy. It's not natural for you. And if you're classed as level 1 support needs for restricted repetitive behavior, that might mean your inflexibility of behavior causes significant interference with functioning in one or more contexts. So your resistance to change and or inflexible thinking makes your life harder in at least one area. Maybe you have to do things a certain way or in a certain order, and if you don't, that's upsetting. You panic when things change, you freak out when somebody touches your stuff. You might be very rigid about how you think the people around you should behave. You might be an extreme perfectionist, and connected to that, maybe you've experienced an eating disorder. That's another way that inflexible thinking can manifest. Number 2, difficulty switching between activities. So maybe you absolutely hate being interrupted. Maybe you often get locked into a hyper-focused state and you forget that time is a thing. That's my whole personality. Maybe it really takes a lot for you to get started on something. Does anyone else get stuck sitting in the car when you arrive somewhere and just find it so difficult to bring yourself to get out? Number 3, problems of organization and planning hamper independence. Maybe you struggle with making and remembering appointments without help. Maybe tidying and cooking are really difficult for you. I'm very time blind and I find it extremely hard to get anywhere on time without help. My husband just takes us on to school and picks him up every day now. Otherwise, I would be late. I would probably be late almost every day, no matter how much I do not want to be late. But there'll be a lot of autistic people who are like the exact opposite to me and are super, on time for everything and very rigid about being on time. That could also be an autistic trait. I used to think I was a very organized person, but looking back, I was kind of a chaotic mess. I compensated for my lack of time management and organization skills by just working all of the time. I tried to remember things by scrolling notes to myself on little scraps of paper, envelopes, anything I could find. They'd surround me on my desk. Some of them would fall on the floor. I'd probably have written the same thing on various pieces of paper like 5 times. It's overwhelming, but since my diagnosis, I have finally been able to be honest with myself. As much as I would love to be somebody who is naturally an organized person, I am in fact somebody who needs extra help and support in that area, and that is nothing to be ashamed of. And for the last 8 months, I've been using the sponsor of today's video, which is a tool that you can download for free using the link below, called X-Tiles. I've got my laptop so we can look at my X-Tiles planner together. If you click here, this is your yearly view, and this is where you can put your goals or maybe your resolutions if you like to make them. I've got my little fidget slug there to motivate me, but you could actually create a whole vision board here, and you can just easily click quarter at the top here to go to the quarterly view if you want to plan your quarter. Renew my son's passport, I did do that. I can tick off my task. Monthly view, this could be home to more short-term goals and useful reminders, and it's really easy to switch which month you're looking at over here. This is weekly. You could put a nice neat overview of your tasks for the week here. I've got a little habit track going on. And when you're setting up any of these, you can use X-Tiles pre-made templates, which makes it really quick and easy to get started. And today's page, you can include your schedule and to-do list, but you can also use it as a home for your notes and things that you don't want to forget. You notice like all the stuff that you're apparently expected by society to hold in your brain. You can basically do all of the things that you might do in a paper bullet journal. It's just not on paper, so you can't lose it. It's not as easy for it to end up on the floor. In fact, it's very difficult. The tasks in your planner are automatically captured and gathered in your task panel, which is here. And if we click the projects tab, this is probably where you can have the most fun, because this is where you put your projects, your big ideas, you know, anything that you need to plan. For me, it's my content creation stuff, but for you, it might be a holiday you're planning, it might be a mood board for the creative project that you're currently working on. The calendar view on X-Tiles is now interactive and it syncs with your Google Calendar, and it'll also all work seamlessly on mobile as well. So if you're like me and the idea of Notion just always felt like too much, too many blocks, too many steps, just too much of a learning curve that you don't have time to do when you're trying to actually get stuff done and maintain your existence. X-Tiles is just like an easier, fun, and very flexible alternative. If you want to try organizing your life without overwhelm, you can click my link in the description. You can download X-Tiles for free. You may as well. You've got nothing to lose. And they also do have paid options with extra features such as premium templates and unlimited storage. So let's have a look at what makes somebody fall under level 2, which is requires substantial support. For social communication, you might have number 1, marked deficits in verbal and non-verbal social communication skills, and social impairments apparent even with supports in place. Obviously, all of this is very medicalized language and not the words that I would choose to use. But if we compare this to the language used for level 1, we've gone from noticeable impairments if the person is unsupported to marked deficits regardless. So basically, it's more immediately obvious to the people around you that there's something different about the ways in which you interact. Perhaps you speak in short sentences and/or it takes you quite a long time to compose them. Perhaps your voice is very monotone, maybe your facial expression is very flat or very intense and over the top. Perhaps the people around you react in a way that suggests they may have noticed a major difference. This could mean that you're more likely to be infantilized or spoken to as if you were a child than somebody who is classed as having level 1 support needs for social communication. People might be more likely to recognize that maybe you have a disability rather than put it down to eccentricity or rudeness. But again, this is where the DSM-5 wording runs into some troubles, because what if you mask? What if you have carefully memorized social scripts? I have this video here about different types of masking, which I'll leave linked if you want to know a little bit more about autistic masking. I think support levels can feel a little bit like we're ranking how high masking a person is, which is that necessarily correlated with their level of support needs? Number 2, limited initiation of social interactions and reduced or abnormal responses to social overtures from others. Again, by comparison to the level 1 language, it was difficulty initiating social interaction, and now it's limited initiation of social interaction. So basically, someone who's been rated level 1 for their social communication might find it super challenging to start a conversation, and maybe it takes a lot of effort, but level 2 may very rarely start an interaction with someone unprompted. Maybe you don't respond at all if somebody speaks to you, or you respond in a way that's seen as unexpected. Perhaps you change the subject or bring up your own interest or start talking about something completely different that was on your mind. The DSM's 5 example is a person who speaks in simple sentences, whose interaction is limited to narrow special interests, and who has markedly odd nonverbal communication. A couple of people who identify as having level 2 support needs shared their experiences over on Reddit in response to the question, what is level 2 autism like? I basically don't talk to anybody unless they talk to me first or it is important. I work full time and live with my partner. Generally, it is not possible for me to have a normal conversation. I lean very heavily on shared cultural context for communicating, so I can talk better to people who also understand the weird niches I am also in. And then another person said, I totally feel the don't talk to anybody unless they talk to me first. I also hate one-on-one conversations, find them near impossible, which is really interesting to me as somebody who I imagine would have maybe been classed as level 1. I don't know, but I actually prefer one-to-one interactions. Again, the group projects are hell. In fact, no, a paired project would also have been hell. A one-to-one project would have also been hell. But one-to-one conversations I find much better than like a group conversation, because I just have one person and I can focus my whole attention on them. This person goes on, but I suppose for me, I can't work full time. I still live at home and don't know if I'll ever live alone or with a partner. My mom attends and books my appointments for me and has authority on all my main accounts like banks, insurances, government benefits, etc. She speaks on my behalf for a lot of things. So I think it's quite interesting to see that there are two very different experiences, and obviously none of these examples I'm giving are going to be the same for every single person. And for level 2, requiring substantial support RRBs, you may experience number 1, inflexibility of behavior, difficulty coping with change, or other restricted/repetitive behaviors appear frequently enough to be obvious to the casual observer and interfere with functioning in a variety of contexts. So this would include stimming intense interests and sensory stuff. So it's saying if you're level 2, you tend to engage in these things very often in a way that most people will notice no matter where you are. So I suppose I stim every day by flapping my hands and bouncing around on my toes. But I only do that when I'm at home. I only do that in private, not across multiple contexts. I'm also able to engage in and enjoy, in moderation, conversations that are not about my special interests. In fact, I often like to keep my interests private and to myself. But again, all of this stuff is masking. But some autistic people who are higher support needs than me might stim more obviously when they're at the grocery store, say, and they might always bring up their special interests if they're talking to strangers. But again, masking, I do stim almost constantly. I do stim if I'm in the grocery store, but just in more subtle ways. I've been getting a bit of an influx, no, it's been like a few, but it feels like an influx of comments about my neck looking bruised, looking discolored, people being worried about me. You don't need to worry, I stim by pinching the skin on my neck almost constantly, and I assume that's why it looks the way that it does. I've done it since I was very, very young. And I used to flap my hands and rock back and forth in all contexts, but I learned not to do that when I went to school. If you notice, stimming is not alluded to at all. If you look at the level 1 RRBs section, that doesn't mean we don't stim because it is part of the overall autism diagnostic criteria. But I guess the assumption is that our stimming is less disruptive. So we're better able to slot into society and therefore our support needs are lower. But does being able to act normal, to play along with society, does that equal thriving? I'd say not. Level 2 also note distress and or difficulty changing focus or action. So the major difference between level 1 and level 2 here is the word distress. For level 1, it was simply difficulty. Where is the line between difficulty and distress? It's a bit vague. I don't know. Distress implies a significant emotional reaction, which I do often have, but only when I'm at home with people I'm comfortable with. If I was out in public, I would internalize it. And again, is internalized distress like an autistic shutdown or extreme anxiety? Is that as likely to be picked up by a diagnostician, by teachers, by parents as crying or an autistic meltdown? Probably not, but both could be contributing to poor mental health for that autistic person. Again, it feels like we're assuming that behavior always reflects somebody's support needs. But as I say, everything about the DSM-5 is based on behavior. Quick note before we continue that I actually have 26 exclusive videos over on Patreon now. So if you finished watching everything over here on the channel, you might enjoy watching those ones after this. I'll leave it linked down below. It includes me reacting to myself as a teenager and picking out my neurodivergent traits. Just laughing at myself as well. But the neurodivergent traits were very obvious in hindsight.
I just ordered the Sims 3 Generations expansion pack. I can't believe it. I got so excited when I learned that they have prams or strollers in the game.
Load of podcast episodes over there too, including a couple with my mum, and you can also join the Discord server to chat to other lovely people. And you can access most of the exclusive content on the lowest tier. It's also super easy to cancel over on Patreon as well. Okay, let's have a look at level 3, which is requiring very substantial support. We've added a very. So if you're rated a level 3 for your social communication support needs, this means the diagnostician has decided that your number 1 severe deficits in verbal and non-verbal social communication skills cause severe impairments in functioning. A lot of words that we do not like. But if we compare to level 2, we've moved from marked deficits to severe deficits. I'm personally not a fan of the word functioning, but it's basically saying that your struggles with communication make it very difficult, maybe even impossible, for you to slot into society as we know it, to work a job, to go to school, to form relationships with other people. You're likely not able to do very much independently. Number 2, very limited initiation of social interactions and minimal response to social overtures from others. So when people speak to you, you might barely respond to them or not respond at all. Some people may only speak a few understandable words or may not speak at all, and it's saying that it's very unlikely that you would start a conversation with another person. The DSM-5 example is a person with few words of intelligible speech who rarely initiates interaction, and when he or she does, makes unusual approaches to meet needs only and responds to only very direct social approaches. So you only interact with people when absolutely necessary, and you won't go out of your way to do so. For level 3 support needs, for RRBs, number 1, inflexibility of behavior, extreme difficulty coping with change, or other RRBs markedly interfere with functioning in all spheres. So it's all the time now, not just in multiple contexts. So perhaps your sensory sensitivities are extremely overwhelming and you find it near impossible to tolerate many environments. In order to self-soothe, you might feel an almost constant need to perform big full body stims, maybe vocal stims, maybe again in a way that's more likely to be considered disruptive or in a way that prevents you from doing other activities like working or doing schoolwork. And maybe you find it very, very difficult to do anything other than engage in / hyper focus on your interests. Number 2, great distress / difficulty changing focus or action. So level 2 was distress, level 3 is great distress. This might describe somebody who absolutely must stick to a set routine to avoid becoming extremely upset and agitated. Maybe even little transitions in your day are overwhelming, like for example having to pause the video that you're watching. So that's what the DSM-5 has to say about support levels. As always, a lot of very medicalized language, references to severity and functioning, which a lot of autistic people, including me, do not love. Trying to define who would fit into which category, particularly when you take into account things like masking, it feels like it would be pretty subjective, and different diagnosticians would come to different conclusions. The spectrum, as I say, is just so broad that trying to shoehorn people in to these 3 different numbers, 6 numbers I suppose, they give you 2 different numbers for each one, doesn't feel like the most scientifically accurate thing in the world. I want to take a look at some of the first infographics that come up when you search autism support levels, because I think this pretty much just sums up a lot of the problems with support levels. We have this first one from Brain Center TMS, the 3 levels of autism. It refers to level 1 requiring support as lowest level and highest functioning. It puts it in quotation marks, but you still said it, we all saw that you still said it. You still said functioning. And also frequently appearing restricted or repetitive behaviors only first appears for level 2. But again, level 1 also must have frequent RRBs, otherwise they wouldn't have met the diagnostic criteria for autism. This one, the 3 functional levels of autism, there's no mention of difficulties switching activities until level 3. And the only traits listed for level 1 are difficulty initiating social interactions and organization problems. You could be forgiven for coming away from this believing that ASD level 1 do not have special interests. And the word distress only showing up for level 3, I mean, this was kind of reflected in the DSM-5 support levels. You could again be forgiven for coming away from this believing that people diagnosed with level 1 and level 2 support needs don't experience emotional distress as a result of their traits, never experience things like meltdowns and shutdowns. And honestly, I think a lot of people do think this way. Often when people are trying to describe severe autism, RFK Jr. and the parents who agree with them, which I made a video about last week, they'll often refer to things like headbanging. They'll often refer to an autistic person in the state of distress as if people all over the autistic spectrum with varying support needs do not experience things like headbanging. I guess maybe the implication is just those things happen more frequently for somebody who requires more support. Is that always necessarily the case though? Probably depends on a lot of different factors. And it feels like we are at risk here of undermining the struggles of autistic people with lower and moderate support needs. But I just feel like graphics like this feel like such an oversimplification. I think sometimes in an attempt to simplify something which is very complicated, autistic people can be so different from each other, and we're trying to cram them into these 3 different categories again, I think you can actually end up making it more confusing, making people more confused by trying to make it simple and easy to communicate. The next one, we have made the spectrum into a straight line, which is not a good sign, never a good sign. And we've used the words high functioning autism and then severe autism at the other side of the spectrum, the red hot autism sign. If you're level 2, you just get autism. You're just autism. And note that none of these point out that you're supposed to be given a separate level for social communication and RRBs. And for level 1 here, the high functioning autism, which is not a phrase that we use anymore, but okay, thanks. Apparently, your repetitive behaviors are only noticeable without support. So I guess all the level 1s must be RRBing all over the place because where is the support? There is very little support. And what does that even mean? Does that mean if you have support, then nobody will know that you have a special interest? Your special interests will go away with support? Again, we're pathologizing everything about being an autistic person. Okay, for this one, we have some very random illustrations and beautiful, beautiful quality. That's sarcasm. Not sure about this creepy little circle going on here, but someone decided that this was a good way to represent communication is very challenging. But these are the 3 functional levels of autism. So I guess that's a completely different thing. But again, narrow interests and repetitive behaviors only appears as a level 2 thing. It's just a level 2 thing. Everyone. I guess my next video will have to be on the 3 functional levels of autism. I'll have to go away and research that and then I'll come back to you. We have this offering from Psych Central. Can you notice what's wrong with this one? Apparently only autistic people who require substantial support have high interests in specific topics. And level 2 are also the only autistic people who may need school accommodations and help with their reading. What if you were rated level 1 and you also have dyslexia? I don't know, that just feels a bit random and out of place there. And there's a lot of crossover between the different levels here. This one has 2 level 2s. So I guess just pick whichever one you prefer. Sorry, level 3, we've forgotten about you. Also interesting that we chose green, yellow, and red, and I assume red was supposed to be level 3. Interesting choice of colors there and interesting implications behind that. And also this one only refers to the social stuff. No RRBs for you. We're taking your RRBs. This one is actually not the worst one, I would say, but developmental delays are listed for level 2 and level 3. That's not mentioned in the diagnostic criteria, and I'm not sure that's really relevant for someone's current level of support needs. And stimming for level 1 is described as my fidgeting is seen as quirky or annoying, but then for level 3, it's my intense repetitive, I assume it's supposed to say repetitive behavior, is calming and important to me. And then for level 2, it's my repetitive behaviors are noticeably unusual. So again, I know they're just trying to cram it into some very short bullet points, but the implication there is that it's only calming and important to people who require very substantial support. And it kind of feels like you're minimizing the need to STEM for lower support needs autistic people. Like it's just cute, quirky fidgeting, not something that we need to do in order to regulate. Like those behaviors are not serving the same purpose for people across the spectrum because maybe the movements are smaller and more subtle. Again, no acknowledgement that you might look just a bit fidgety because you're actually masking. I'm also not sure I like 3 levels of autism spectrum disorder being the heading. Like we're talking about support needs for autistic people, not XP, autism XP. This one uses the words mild and severe. Unfortunately, I just don't think you can escape that implication with support levels. This one, the 3 functional levels autism spectrum disorder, is basically describing how much ABA therapy people might require across the spectrum, which is interesting. And yeah, level 3, they recommend 35 to 40 hours per week because that doesn't sound horrific and probably abusive. But ABA therapy is a multi-billion-dollar industry over in America, and I guess capitalism, the parents gotta work, so I guess it can kind of function as very expensive respite care sometimes. Very well, again, we're back to very well, getting level 3 autism completely wrong here. Symptoms of level 3 autism. This one's just horrible. They link it to lower IQ, but the DSM-5 does not link support levels to somebody's IQ at all. But unfortunately, I think that is an assumption that people will make. Diagnosticians are supposed to separately note whether they're diagnosing autism with or without intellectual impairment, as they call it. But they say understanding the often uneven intellectual profile of a child or adult with autism spectrum disorder is necessary for interpreting diagnostic features. Separate estimates of verbal or non-verbal skills are necessary, e.g. using untimed verbal tests to assess potential strengths in individuals with limited language. So basically, don't write somebody off just because they can't speak, and remember that autistic people often have very uneven skill sets. This graphic makes it seem like all individuals who are classed as level 3 won't have the ability to speak. The link to epilepsy being there too, physical symptoms like sleeplessness and epilepsy, is also a bit odd. It is more likely that autistic people who have an intellectual disability will be diagnosed with epilepsy, but they're acting here like it's an autistic trait in itself. And again, not all autistic people who are classed as level 3 will be diagnosed with an intellectual disability. And also autistic people who are classed as having lower support needs may have an intellectual disability. Also lower support needs autistic people may have epilepsy. And then we also use the word violent here in relation to rocking, which is a soothing behavior, which is an interesting choice. Feels like we're making a lot of assumptions about higher support needs autistic people and autistic people who don't speak here. Just feels very medicalized and stigmatizing. Honestly, just think something like this is just so much better, so much more accurate. Imagine if your diagnostic report had a little chart like this. Can we not make this a thing? And I think that's the issue with all of this. Support for autistic people needs to be individualized. This is why we don't do support levels over in the UK. I think shorthands like the levels can just be a recipe for disaster, for misunderstandings, for stereotyping, for putting one end of the spectrum in quotation mark in green and the other end in red. I guess I can see the benefit of telling somebody, my daughter is autistic and she requires very substantial support, but obviously that doesn't give you the full picture of what that autistic person actually needs. And saying my daughter is level 3 autistic probably means very, very little to the general public. You'd probably have to explain to them how many levels there are, and then they might assume that level 1 means higher support needs or something like that. I think these infographics, which again are the first things that you see on Google, I think they make it very clear that support levels have kind of just filled the space left by functioning labels. I think it's inevitable that people will make assumptions about things like someone's intelligence based on their support needs. Maybe making assumptions about a person's worth and the value that they offer to society, which is very scary. Again, RFK Jr. In a time where a lot of people are really trying to push for a new diagnostic label, profound autism, which like support needs has a very shaky vague proposed diagnostic criteria. Trying to decide who would fit into it and who wouldn't is really messy. I think we need to be really wary of things like this. In the past, functioning labels were removed because they were deemed too imprecise to be useful. Whenever we try and divide the spectrum, we tend to run into trouble. We undermine the needs of some autistic people. I see little squabbles online all of the time between autistic people of varying support needs about who is more autistic or who struggles more than the other person. Who has the right to speak about autism is a big conversation at the moment. And as I say, it can lead to people undermining the ability and the value of higher support needs autistic individuals, which is really scary and dangerous. So how do you feel about support levels? Do you use them? Do you find them useful and practical in any way? Do you frequently tell people what level of support you were diagnosed with or you identify with? I kind of find them most useful when we just reduce them to requires support, requires substantial support, requires very substantial support, and we're just describing how independent a person is currently able to be. You know, whether that's caused by the fact that they're in an autistic burnout or whether that's caused by the fact that they really struggle to communicate. Of course, we need to remember that according to the DSM-5, they are flexible and they can change throughout a person's life. I don't know, I'm not sure I would ever call myself a level 1 autistic person. I don't really identify that way. I just call myself an autistic person, and I guess if people want to know more than that, then they'll have to ask, they'll have to get to know me. I don't even know how I'd function on my own. I've never lived on my own. I don't know whether I would remember to make myself meals and things like that. I currently very rarely prepare myself food. It would be interesting. I think my mental health would definitely suffer. I really struggle when I'm on my own and get into like very negative kind of thought loops. I kind of need people there to like bring me back down to earth. I don't know. I don't think living alone would be great for me. That's all I can say. I do think I definitely require some level of support. What level that is, I don't know. If you missed my last video, it was about some parents of autistic children over on TikTok who really don't seem to be huge fans of level 1 autistic people, feel like we're taking up a bit too much space, and then are fans of, you know, a man who still believes in the year 2025 that vaccines cause autism. It's a super long video. If you've got some chores to do, you can stick it on in the background. I unpack a bunch of TikToks from parents. And if you'd like to hear me rant some more about recent attempts to segregate the spectrum, I do 2 exclusive videos a month over on Patreon. I'll leave my Patreon linked down below. On the lowest tier, $4 you can access all of the exclusive videos. I have 27 on there now, and you can also join the Discord server. And then I also on other tiers have a load of podcast episodes and outtakes and things like that. And remember, you can download X-Tiles for free using the link below. That's a way you can support the channel for free if you would like to, and you also get to use a really cool, really useful, really easy to use tool in the process. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video very soon. Bye.